I always loved the evening silence. It was the only moment of the day when I could feel truly free. No calls, no lectures, no intrusive questions about the future. Just me in my room, filled with the soft light of the lamp, the scent of lavender, and the distant sounds of cars outside the window. But that evening, the silence was different. It seemed to press down on me, becoming too thick, too tense, as if I wasn't alone. I returned home later than usual. College had exhausted me to the limit, and all I wanted was to shed all that burden, bury myself in bed, and fall asleep. But as I closed the door behind me, I felt something strange. The house was too quiet. I dropped my backpack on the floor, kicked off my sneakers, and walked into my room. Everything was as usual, everything in its place, and yet something was off. I ran my fingers over the light switch, making the warm light cut through the darkness. Then I reached for my t-shirt, intending to change into my pajamas, and that's when it happened. At some point, I felt it, an elusive sensation of being watched. It burned my skin like electricity. I froze. My heart pounded loudly in my chest, tightening in anticipation of something inexplicable. Slowly, very slowly, I turned my head toward the window, and I saw him. Through the thin fabric of the curtain, in the scattered light of the street lamp, he stood, our neighbor, Mr. Harris. He wasn't moving, he was just staring. I froze, feeling the blood in my veins turn to ice. We had lived next door to each other all my life. He had always been kind, helpful. He smiled at my mom when she went out for her morning run, helped us when something broke in the house. But now there was not a drop of that kindness in him. His silhouette seemed frozen. His eyes, God, his eyes. I couldn't make out the expression on his face because of the darkness, but I felt that gaze with every cell of my body. My mind raced in panic. Was this an accident? Maybe he just came out to get some air. Maybe he wasn't even looking at me. But part of me knew, no, he was looking at me. I swallowed, trying to calm down. Maybe I should just go and close the curtains, pretend nothing happened, but my body wouldn't listen. It was frozen in some primal fear, deep and ancient, like the instinct of self-preservation. Finally, I took a step back, trying not to make any noise. My hands were shaking. He still didn't move. A second passed, then another, and then he slowly tilted his head, just a little bit. But it was enough to make my stomach twist into a tight knot. It wasn't just a casual glance. It was a sign, slow, eerie, deliberate. He saw that I noticed him, and he knew I wouldn't say anything. My throat went dry. I took a step back, then another until I reached the bed. My back bumped into the mattress, making me slightly flinch, and suddenly the light in his house went out. I didn't know what to do. Tell my mom? Call someone? Or was I just overthinking? But deep down, I knew the truth. That gaze was real. That night I didn't sleep. I listened to every rustle, every sound outside the window, feeling something sticky and cold creeping into my heart. Something I couldn't hide from. Something that was just beginning. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Even during the day when the sun lit up the streets and children ran around the neighboring yards, that feeling didn't leave me. Maybe I was just overthinking. Maybe I imagined that Mr. Harris was standing under the street lamp and looking straight into my window. But the more I tried to convince myself that it was an accident, the more something sticky and dark grew inside me. Intuition. It screamed at me. That wasn't a casual glance. That was something else. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the very next morning, he was there again. I went outside to go to the store on the corner. An ordinary Saturday morning, the morning air still cool, quiet streets, the smell of freshly cut grass. And suddenly I felt his presence. I didn't see him right away, but I knew he was nearby. And sure enough, Mr. Harris was standing by his house, lazily watering the lawn. He noticed me right away. "Good morning, Ellie." His voice was low, insinuating. "How are you?" An ordinary phrase, an ordinary greeting. But for some reason, everything inside me tightened. I forced a smile, pretending to be in a hurry. "Everything's fine. Glad to hear it." He tilted his head to the side, studying me as if savoring every detail of my face. I felt uncomfortable. "You've grown up," he suddenly said as if to himself. "I remember you being so little. Time flies, doesn't it?" His voice was soft, but there was something else in it, something that made me put up my defenses. I clenched my fingers into fists. "Yes, time flies," I replied evenly. I wanted to leave, but he was in no hurry to let me go. "Do you live alone now?" he casually asked. I froze. That question wasn't casual. "No," I sharply replied. "Mom just went away for a bit." He smirked. Of course. I just thought maybe you needed something. You know I'm always around." His voice was almost tender, too tender. I felt a sense of unease rising inside me. This was a hint. I saw how his gaze lingered on me a little longer than necessary, how his tongue flicked between his lips almost mechanically, how his hand slightly squeezed the hose, as if controlling himself. I didn't know what to say, but I knew I didn't want to stand there anymore. "Okay, I have to go," I said quickly, taking a step back. He smiled. "Of course, Ellie. But remember, if you need anything, you know where to go." I nodded and turned around. But as I walked away, I felt his gaze on my back. I returned home, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Something was wrong. That conversation, it looked ordinary. But it wasn't ordinary. The words were simple. But the tone, the hints, his eyes, I knew I wasn't overthinking. I felt it with every fiber of my being. Harris wasn't just a kind neighbor. He was watching. He was studying. He was waiting for something. And the scariest thing, I didn't know what, but I felt he would come back. After that encounter with Harris, I tried to convince myself that it was all just a coincidence. But the truth was, I was scared. Something in his voice, in his gaze. It wasn't what a kind neighbor should feel, but I pushed those thoughts away. Just a conversation, just neighbors. Nothing more. That's what I thought. Until there was a knock at the door. It was already late. The house was filled only with the sounds of silence and the soft light of the desk lamp. I curled up on the couch trying to relax with a book in my hands, but my thoughts kept returning to him. And then, a knock. Soft, cautious, but insistent. I froze. The clock on the phone showed 10:47 p.m. Who could come at such a time? My heart started beating faster. I slowly got up, crept to the door, and looked through the peephole. "Mr. Harris." I froze. Why was he here? I didn't move, hoping he would just leave. But he knocked again. "Ellie, it's me. Open up, please." His voice was soft, almost gentle. I clenched my fingers on the doorknob. Don't open. Don't open." But if I didn't answer, he would know I was home. I took a deep breath and, trying to keep my voice calm, asked, "Is something wrong?" Pause. And then his voice, low, steady. I thought you might be scared after that night. I saw that you locked all the windows." How did he know I locked the windows? A chill ran down my spine. "I'm fine," I replied, trying to sound indifferent. Silence. I almost believed he would leave. But then he said, "Ellie, isn't it strange to be alone in the house?" Those words made my heart tighten. What did he mean? I didn't answer. And then the doorknob slightly rattled. A moment of panic. I stepped back, feeling fear pierce me from head to toe. He was checking if the door was locked. I was sure of it. I felt him through the door. That moment lasted an eternity. And then he slowly laughed. A soft, gentle laugh. "Well then," he said. "Good night, Ellie." Footsteps fading away. The sound of boot heels on the asphalt. Only when his silhouette dissolved into the darkness did I release the breath I had been holding. My hands were shaking. I didn't sleep all night, because now I knew for sure he wasn't just a kind neighbor. He wanted more, and damn it, he wouldn't stop. After that night, one thing kept bothering me. He had tried to open the door. I didn't want to believe that Mr. Harris could consciously check if it was locked, but every cell in my body felt the danger. I tried to live as usual. But soon I realized he hadn't left. He was everywhere. I decided to distract myself. An ordinary day, ordinary plans. Stop by the cafe, meet a friend, relax a bit. But when I entered the cafe, my heart sank. He was already there. He was sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, completely relaxed as if everything was fine. But when he saw me, his eyes slowly scanned me from head to toe. "Ellie, hi." He smiled as if the coincidence didn't surprise him at all. I didn't answer right away. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. He knew I would be here. "What a coincidence," I dryly replied. He nodded, sipping his coffee. "Yes, funny, isn't it? We keep running into each other." I felt a growing unease inside me. I took a step back. "I have to go." His voice stopped me right at the door. "You look tired, Ellie, not sleeping at night." I was stunned. How did he? I slowly turned around and he was smiling. Not a friendly smile. He knew. He knew I hadn't slept after that night. I rushed out of the cafe without looking back. The next few days turned into a real nightmare. Wherever I went, he was somewhere nearby. In the store, "Hi, Ellie, another coincidence?" In the library, "I didn't think you read such books." Even near the college campus, "You're coming back so late, it's not safe." He was watching me. I couldn't prove anything. He wasn't doing anything obvious, but he was everywhere, and it was breaking me psychologically. I no longer knew when he would appear. I no longer knew how far he was willing to go. But the scariest thing happened that evening. I came back from classes exhausted and angry. My hands were shaking. I couldn't take this constant presence anymore. But when I opened the door, I immediately felt it. Something was wrong. I slowly walked inside, froze in the hallway. The air was heavy, and then I saw it. On the kitchen table stood a cup of coffee, but I hadn't left it there. I hadn't made coffee. A feeling of horror struck my chest. I wasn't alone here. Someone had been in my house. He had been here. I grabbed my phone, but at that moment a voice sounded behind me. "You look scared, Ellie." I froze. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, as if he belonged there, as if he had the right to be there. How did he get inside? I didn't know what to do. I couldn't even scream. Only one thing was clear. He was no longer hiding. He had crossed the line. He was in my house, standing in the kitchen doorway, in no hurry to explain how he got inside, as if he belonged there, as if he had always been there. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I couldn't show fear. If I got scared, he would see it. If I faltered, he would take a step forward. I held the phone in my hand but couldn't even press the call button. My voice became dry, foreign. "How did you get in here?" Harris smiled. "Oh, your door was unlocked. I thought you might have forgotten to close it, and I decided to check if everything was okay." A lie. I remembered locking it. He was lying to my face. "You shouldn't leave the house open," he continued, taking a slow step forward. "You're alone." He knew. He had always known. "Get out." I tried to make my voice firmer. "Leave my house." His gaze fixed on me. "Why are you talking to me like that, Ellie?" His tone was almost offended, as if I had done something wrong, as if I had crossed the line, not him. "I just want to make sure you're safe." He slowly ran his finger along the table, as if lingering. "I'm always around, you know." My stomach twisted in a spasm. His words sounded too calm. I knew he hadn't just come here for no reason. He was testing the boundaries, watching to see how far he could go. He enjoyed seeing my fear. I tried to slowly take a step back, but his eyes didn't leave me. "Are you afraid of me, Ellie?" He said it so softly as if it were a joke. I forced myself not to react, but inside everything was screaming. Every instinct, every cell of my body knew, if you don't get rid of him now, this won't end. I took a deep breath and said as coldly as possible, "Leave." Now he looked at me for a second. 2, 3. Then he slowly nodded. "Okay, Ellie." He took a step back. "I didn't mean to scare you. You're lying." He slowly walked to the door, but before he left, he paused, turned around and said, "I'm glad you trust me." "What?" I froze. He smiled as if he knew something I didn't, and then he left. I locked the door behind him, checking the lock 2, 3 times. Inside, everything was shaking. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't prove anything. He hadn't hit me. He hadn't threatened with words. He hadn't done anything openly horrible. But I knew. I knew. He was just getting started. I went to the window. His silhouette was standing on the street. He hadn't left. He was just standing there, watching, waiting. And then I realized I was trapped. I was trapped. He hadn't left. He was just standing there, watching. I closed all the doors, checked the locks, turned off the lights in the house, but it didn't make me feel any better. Inside, there was a feeling that I had already lost. He was waiting. He knew something, and he was sure I couldn't do anything. But I couldn't just wait. I had to act. I waited. 2 hours, 3. The house was quiet. The wind outside the window rustled the branches against the glass. I sat in the darkness, clutching a knife in my hand. If he tried to come in again, I would be ready. There was a knock. I froze. 3 short knocks. Slow. He was here. I went to the door but didn't open it. "Open up, Ellie." The voice behind the door was soft, gentle, as if he hadn't been standing under my windows all night, as if he hadn't entered my house without permission. I was silent. "I just want to talk," he said, even softer. "Why are you doing this to me?" I felt the venom in his words, manipulation, gaslighting. He was making me the guilty one, but I didn't answer. "You know you can trust me, Ellie." Another knock on the door, another step towards catastrophe. But I had a plan. I unlocked my phone, dialed the number. But before I pressed call, I heard a sound, a click. The doorknob slowly turned. He was coming in. I didn't think. I couldn't afford to think. He took a step into the hallway, his shadow spreading across the floor. I struck. The blade went deep into him. His eyes widened. "Ellie!" He gasped, grabbing me. I pushed him away. He fell to his knees. Blood began to spread across the floor. I was breathing heavily, my heart pounding loudly in my ears. I had done it. I had killed him. Something was wrong. I looked down. It wasn't Harris. It was someone else. His face was contorted in pain. I didn't know him. And then the door swung open again. Harris entered, alive, unharmed, looking at me and smiling. "Oh, Ellie." His voice was calm. "You did it all for me." The world began to crumble into chaos. I hadn't killed him. I had killed who he wanted me to kill. I was trapped. "Now we have a secret." He slowly closed the door behind him. My hands were shaking. I had to call the police. But what would I say? I was standing over a corpse. I had killed someone, and he was clean. He looked at me, and I saw triumph in his eyes. He had won. I had become his crime. Question to the reader. Will Ellie choose to confess or cover up the murder? What if Harris was never the hunter? What if he just knew how to turn Ellie into a monster? Did he win, or is this not the end?